John Keats was born in London on October 31st, 1795. His list of works includes the book Poems, Endymion, Ode on a Grecian Urn, Ode to a Nightingale, La Belle Dame sans Merci, Ode to Autumn, and Hyperion. He was a part of the Romantic era literary period. John Keats was the oldest of 4 children born to his parents, Thomas and Frances Keats. Keats was only 8 when his father was trampled by a horse, an event that would shape not only the rest of his life, but also the central focus of his poems that he would go on to write later. After his father's death, Keats's mother Frances remarried, following a series of very bad decisions. She lost basically all of their family's money and ended up leaving her children with their grandmother. She returned a while later, but died of tuberculosis soon after that. During this difficult time in his life, John Keats used art and literature as a source of comfort. He began studying at Enfield Academy soon after his father's death, and he became incredibly immersed in the world of literature. Meanwhile, Keats's grandmother had given control of the family's remaining money to a merchant named Richard Abbey. Abbey was very deceitful and overzealous in saving money, and it is believed that he was the reason why John Keats was pulled out of Enfield Academy. In 1810, right after leaving the academy, Keats went on to study to become a surgeon. He became a licensed apothecary in 1816. Despite his training, Keats really wasn't any good at medicine. This is because his vested interest in literature and the arts never stopped. He was eventually introduced to Leigh Hunt, the publisher of The Examiner, which was a weekly paper known as one of the leading intellectual journals. Hunt had been in prison a few times for libeling the prince, but he was one of Keats's most early supporters. He became Keats's first publisher, introducing the young man to the entirely new world of politics, which also influenced Keats's work. Keats wrote the sonnet written on the day that Mr. Leigh Hunt left prison in honor of his early benefactor. As well as establishing John Keats as a poet, Leigh Hunt also introduced him to other young poets at the time, including Percy Shelley and William Wordsworth. With the help of his new friends, John Keats published his first volume of poetry in 1817, titled Poems by John Keats. The year after, Keats published Endymion, which is a massive 4,000-line poem based off of the Greek myth Endymion. Keats had a distinctively bold and daring style, which earned him harsh criticism from England's 2 most trusted publications, Blackwood's Magazine and the Quarterly Review. The criticisms were more like attacks on the young poet, and they were not just directed at Keats. These publications lobbied attacks at the entire group of young poets who were sponsored by Leigh Hunt, including Percy Shelley and Wordsworth. A memorable article was published in Blackwood's Magazine by John Lockhart, and it was called On the Cockney School of Poetry. This article discussed how absurd Keats's sonnets were, and continuously insulted Keats's appearance, saying that the way he styles his hair is out of fashion. It also states that Keats is incredibly stupid. He called for nobody to purchase any of Keats's works and talks about the moral depravity of Keats and his friends. This specific article made Keats incredibly anxious about the publishing of Endymion, which had not yet occurred. It turned out that Keats's anxiety was for good reason. After the publishing of Endymion, it faced the same hatred as Keats's previous works had. One review had even called the work the imperturbable, driveling idiocy of Endymion. It is known that these harsh attacks did affect Keats in some way. Percy Shelley recorded that it destroyed the young man and led to his later declining health, but most of these claims have been refuted. By the time Endymion was published, Keats was already working on other projects. By the end of 1817, he was realizing his view on poetry and society. In letters to his friends, Keats states that his vision of poetry is something that draws its beauty from real human experiences rather than mystical fantasy. This idea of taking something real and making it unreal is very typical of the Romantic era, and it stemmed from Enlightenment ideas. The Enlightenment had occurred just before the Romantic era, leaving behind a new generation of brilliant young minds, including Keats, Percy Shelley, and Wordsworth. Enlightenment ideas include social mobility, new technology, and a rising standard of living. The Enlightenment birthed the idea of a new, better world and made this better world possible for everybody for the first time in history. Because of previous strife, the Enlightenment led to a new hope in young artists such as Keats. Keats looked to the past to speak about the hopeful future, which was typical of the Romantic era poets. This hope translated directly into Keats's works, the most clear example being in Ode on a Grecian Urn. During this time of realization in his life, Keats was also working on his famous negative capability, which states that humans are capable of exceeding societal expectations, both creatively and intellectually. Through these writings and these thoughts, Keats was rebelling against the same critics who hated him. Keats believed that poetry was not conventional and didn't have to be squeezed into a specific box. He saw the world as one that was more creative than the conventions of the times permitted. In late 1818, Keats dedicated a large portion of his time to caring for his brother Tom, who had contracted tuberculosis. This year, he also wrote his first Shakespearean sonnet, titled When I Have Fears That I May Cease to Be. He was very prolific in his writing during this year, having written poems Isabella, An Ode to Autumn, and the first part of Hyperion. However, Keats's brother died in the middle of this. His death stopped Keats's writing for over a year. Keats did not continue writing until late 1819, where he finished Hyperion. The poem would go unpublished until 3 decades later. In 1819, Keats himself contracted tuberculosis. His health went quickly. He moved to Italy with a friend since his doctor suggested a warmer climate. He began feeling better for a brief time, but was soon back in bed with a high temperature. The last few months of his life were incredibly painful, leading Keats to finally ask his doctor, "How long is this posthumous existence of mine to go on?" John Keats died at the young age of 25. Despite publishing 3 volumes of poetry during his short life, Keats had only sold a total of 200 copies of his work by the time he died. He is remembered today largely because of his friends Percy Shelley and Wordsworth, who strived to keep his legacy alive. He is also remembered because of Alfred Lord Tennyson, who was greatly influenced by the style and works of John Keats. One of the best examples out of John Keats's works that displays Romantic-era ideas is Ode on a Grecian Urn. Before further discussing this poem, please enjoy a reading of Ode on a Grecian Urn, read by Thomas O'Bedlam.
Ode on a Grecian Urn by John Keats. Thou still unravished bride of quietness, thou foster child of silence and slow time, sylvan historian, who canst thus express a flowery tale more sweetly than our rhyme? What leaf-fringed legend haunts about thy shape, of deities or mortals, or of both, in Tempe or the dales of Arcady? What men or gods are these? What maidens loath? What mad pursuit? What struggle to escape? What pipes and timbrels? What wild ecstasy? Heard melodies are sweet, but those unheard are sweeter. Therefore ye soft pipes play on, not to the sensual ear, but more endeared, pipe to the spirit ditties of no tone. Fair youth, beneath the trees, thou canst not leave thy song, nor ever can those trees be bare. Bold lover, never, never canst thou kiss, though winning near the goal, yet do not grieve, she cannot fade. Though thou hast not thy bliss, forever wilt thou love, and she be fair. Ah, happy, happy boughs, that cannot shed your leaves, nor ever bid the spring adieu, and happy melodist, unwearied, forever piping songs forever new. More happy love, more happy, happy love, forever warm and still to be enjoyed, forever panting and forever young, all breathing human passion far above, that leaves a heart high sorrowful and cloyed, a burning forehead and a parching tongue. Who are these coming to the sacrifice? To what green altar, O mysterious priest, leadst thou that heifer glowing at the skies, and all her silken flanks with garlands dressed? What little town by river or seashore, or mountain built with peaceful citadel, is emptied of its folk at this pious morn? And, little town, thy streets forevermore will silent be, and not a soul to tell why thou art desolate can e'er return. O Attic shape, fair attitude, with breed of marble men and maidens overwrought, with forest branches and the trodden weed, thou, silent form, dost tease us out of thought as doth eternity, cold pastoral. When old age shall this generation waste, thou shalt remain, in midst of other woe than ours, a friend to man, to whom thou sayest, beauty is truth, truth's beauty. That is all ye know on earth, and all ye need to know.
In his work Ode on a Grecian Urn, John Keats's descriptions of the ideas of free thinking, idealized settings, and the hopeful possibilities of a different world encapsulate the ideas of the Romantic era. One of the centric Romantic era ideas is the idea of free thinking. During this era, people became more comfortable with freely expressing their opinions and ideas, and this occurred because of the new hope that was felt by the young people of this period. The period before the Romantic era was full of intellectual oppression, which is the main reason for the emergence of the idea of free thinking. In Ode on a Grecian Urn, the speaker creates stories about the images that he sees, and this imagination directly correlates with free thinking. Through his writing of Ode on a Grecian Urn, Keats is expressing the beauty that he saw in the world, a world where, to quote Keats, beauty is truth and truth is beauty. Another main Romantic era idea is the idea of hope, specifically hope of the world to come. Ode on a Grecian Urn speculates about these possibilities in every story that is told during the poem. The speaker's stories turn the urn itself into a bowl of new ideas and thoughts. Basically, the urn becomes representative of the history that it has lived through. The last Romantic era idea that is displayed in this poem is the idea of idealized or unattainable settings. Romantic era literature features whatever is not realistic, and idealized worlds and settings can be seen in nearly every romantic work. This stems from the past oppression of freedom of thought. This was one of the first periods where people were free to express themselves and write about whatever they pleased. In Ode on a Grecian Urn, the speaker takes real things and idealizes them, making them unreal. The idea of immortality is mentioned numerous times throughout the poem, with Keats describing a world where people are, to quote Keats again, forever panting and forever young, which is really any average person's idea of an ideal world. All of these Romantic era characteristics combined create an iconic piece of Romantic era poetry. This work represents the central ideas of one of the most important periods in literature's history and is written by one of the period's most influential writers, Keats.